Welcome to the Baunfire podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Call of Duty is coming to Game Pass Day 1, the Division Heartland has been canceled, PlayStation 5 is selling well for now, and much more. Before we get started, please subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel, hit the like button and leave a thoughtful comment, or subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and maybe even leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Thank you to everyone who supports all of my content as YouTube members, Twitch subscribers, and Patreon patrons. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, check out the link in the description of the show. So after the crazy kind of drama of last week, we had a somewhat more muted thing this week. Still quite a bit of news, a lot of fallout after the studio closures with Xbox. Lots of numbers coming out and games coming out, and you can definitely tell that amongst the industry, excitement is starting to come up for all of the summer Game Fest things, the summer showcases, and so on. Everyone's announcing all of their shows as well. And something that 2 points that I kind of want to point out that I predicted, I think last week, and if I didn't, I'm doing it now, is that I don't pretend that people have already forgotten that Xbox shut down studios, but a lot of that energy is gone already. And just like I predicted, either in my head or on the show last week, gamers have short memories. It's weird. Gamers have short memories and the longest permanent memories as well. Because like some companies, they'll hold grudges against them for the rest of their lives over something they did in the 90s. Or sometimes people get over stuff extremely quickly. And I feel like, especially nowadays, maybe with news in general, in all facets of life, but especially in gaming, everyone was mad. I'm sure some people are still frustrated, but for the most part, people have kind of moved on, and that's kind of what I assumed would happen. And I think by the time the showcases come out, especially Xboxes, unless some other awful news comes, I kind of think that people are mostly going to be over it. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying, that I agree with that. But, when people are running headlines and sensationalizing things, clickbaiting things, in my opinion, not really giving the full answer or explanations of these situations and these business situations, that's what you kind of run into. And to me, it's, a big thing I've been saying a lot in the last week is people need to keep in mind that when we see the way that the games media industry is covering things in the games industry, people have to remember that as tumultuous as things are in the games industry, things are really bad in the games media industry. If I feel like there haven't been any big issues in the last 3 to 6 months, but like entire websites have been shutting down. Layoffs have been insanely common amongst various gaming media websites and things like that. Especially consolidation. Maybe the most recent thing has been Rooster Teeth getting shut down, especially with all of their gaming stuff that went away. So it doesn't seem that crazy to say that, maybe a good chunk of the games industry, especially the higher side of it, the more established side of it, is taking a route of clickbait and sensationalism to stay relevant and to make sure that they keep getting clicks and attention to survive. And in my opinion, that has led to an entire industry just not covering things very well. Now, are there, correlations there between how, political news and all of that? Maybe. I don't want to talk about that. That's a whole different conversation. I would want to start a whole different podcast for that, and I don't plan on it. So I I hope that the lesson, especially from a few months ago, when all of the rumors started spreading about all of Xbox's games going to PlayStation, and a bunch of the weird influencer types and journalists and content creators really went like insane for a week or two, especially kind of knowing that they could say whatever they wanted, and whether it was true or not, no one was going to remember, which has become pretty common. Uh, I would have thought consumers, gamers, would have learned their lesson from that, when basically none of that stuff came true, or at least not to the severity that was being rumored. And then, especially, and even in this last week or so, with things that are going on, I just be curious is what I would say, and maybe don't believe everything at face value. Remember that the vast majority of news sources now, especially in the games industry, are just clinging to relevance in life, and that maybe not everything reported is entirely accurate or true. But there's my conspiracy portion of the podcast. So let's get into some gaming news. So first, we'll start off with Xbox. There's various topics to cover here. So I'll start off with a Wall Street Journal report that is basically confirming that the next Call of Duty, I believe it's technically Black Ops 6, will be day one on Game Pass. There's been a lot of recent rumors that there's a lot of internal debates about whether or not this would happen. I think I talked about this last week a little bit, but it's the whole idea of, you buy ABK, Activision Blizzard King, the shining star in that acquisition, at least the publicized one, being Activision with Call of Duty, and the fact that even their bad games sell 30 million copies or more, and that they sell them for $70 a piece. And then you have the multiplayer, the seasonal passes, and all the microtransactions, and it's just a juggernaut of profit. Call of Duty is. And there's been a lot of talk about whether or not it would even be on Game Pass, because there's a pretty good chance that that's going to be Xbox passing up a lot of revenue if they do that. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. And what I'll talk about is a chart I actually saw on Kind of Funny on their Games Daily just today, showing the split between where people are buying Call of Duty and spending their money. And Xbox was only about 10% of that. And so something to consider is that this is still a multi-platform game. So on Xbox, and probably to a smaller degree on PC, you're going to have people playing it through Game Pass. And you're going to lose that $70 initial patch, that $70 punch of money from them. But then you've still got the 60 million PlayStation 5 consoles. And I don't know if they've said if this next game is still cross-platform or not. I'm not sure. But if it is still on PS4, if it's still on Xbox One, then you still have people there. The majority of Call of Duty players are not on Xbox and don't have Game Pass. And I suspect there will be at least a small jump of console sales for Xbox, maybe a decent jump of Game Pass subscriptions related to this. Still, the vast majority of players are either people who aren't going to do that, they're just going to pay for the game even on Xbox, or are definitely going to do that on PC or over on PlayStation. It may be a small hit to sales, but I don't think it's going to be that big. And I think that, at least in their mind, they're probably hoping that the long-term subscription money that they're going to make from this is going to be worth it for the small number of mostly Xbox sales they're going to lose. Now, this leads into a report by Jez Corden that talked about this kind of this code name for an internal discussions going on called Latitude, where it's a discussion going on, I assume mostly between the leadership of Microsoft and Xbox, about what games they should consider going multi-platform. I think that this is an interesting conversation because especially during Xbox's Hell Week earlier this year, where there were all the rumors that like all of the Xbox games were going to PlayStation, and there's no point in having an Xbox anymore. And, Halo's going to be on PlayStation and all this. And then the result of that was them announcing, four, basically like second tier games that are under Xbox going to PlayStation and Nintendo to a point. And now that this is coming up again, right? So we're seeing rumors about, Hellblade 2 is going to PlayStation 5 and all of this. And I guess I have like a few points to make about this. The first point being that for all intents and purposes, it seems like Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment, the two single player games they put on PlayStation 5, made no dent at all. Like didn't do anything. So where we saw Sea of Thieves and of course I'm gonna forget right now, Grounded, both do really well. Sea of Thieves doing extremely well on PlayStation 5 as a multiplayer game, and Grounded I think being top 10 or top 20 in sales for PlayStation 5, which to me was still surprising because it's a different size of game. And then we have Hi-Fi and Pentiment both seemingly not hitting. To me, it makes it more and more likely that we're going to see maybe a lot more of Xbox's multiplayer games potentially going over the PlayStation after a certain amount of time. But it, to me, makes it less and less likely that we're going to see the single player games go over there. So where we see the rumors of like Halo, maybe Halo does end up over there at some point, especially Infinite, because it's multiplayer, and that would probably do pretty well over there, especially for a console that outside of third party doesn't really have any first person shooter offerings. But that would be pretty wild, right? And it would probably only be the multiplayer side. I don't know. I still think that feels blasphemous. But, then the discussion comes to things like, then what games are going to go over there? I still am just like almost certain that we're not going to see the big tentpole games over there anytime soon. Gears, Halo, the ones that maybe, or at least used to be their tentpoles. I think Xbox is still trying to discover what their current tentpoles even are. But there's just been a lot of discussion, all this multi-platform talk. PlayStation is just now dabbling in multi-platform if you consider PC a separate platform, which it is. Xbox has been doing multi-platform for a really long time, and they've been doing day one multi-platform for a really long time. So these ideas, even though I don't think they're happening anytime soon, and they may never, of day one on other platforms, isn't that crazy because they've been doing it a long time. Now I know there's a unique relationship between Xbox, Microsoft, and Windows being the predominant PC location or operating system that people are playing their games on. And that does matter, the Xbox putting their games on PC day one and putting them on PlayStation day one are two very different things because they aren't really competing with PC to a point. I mean, Xbox is competing with Steam, right? Like they aren't, they work together, but they aren't on the same side, in the other platforms as well. I just don't think this is that crazy. And I think that maybe the last point I'll make about it is that the problem with these rumors, which have gotten really popular for Jez and lots of other folks to report on with different levels of sincerity, in my opinion, is that, the way it works with these corporations, especially, right now with Xbox and Microsoft, is they're considering everything. We know from the Activision Blizzard King leaks, they consider even the wildest things. They considered if they could buy Nintendo or not. So right now you could, back when those leaks came out and people did this, or even if those leaks would have come out not related to the ABK acquisition, you could have had stories come out and say, Xbox and Microsoft leadership are considering buying Nintendo. And that's not going to happen. Nintendo wouldn't sell. It would be way too big of a price. Technically, Xbox could probably buy them or Microsoft probably could. But from a actual making it happen thing, there's just no way, right? But they surely talked about it. I bet they've talked about buying PlayStation. It would never happen. There's so many logistical hoops and issues with doing that. But they've probably talked about it. They've probably talked about shutting Xbox down. They've probably talked about pumping it up twice as much as they already do. they talk about everything. They consider everything. And I guess where I get really frustrated with these conversations about there being no red line for the games that could go to PlayStation, of course, they're probably talking about the possibility of, about every possibility, putting every single Xbox game over there, even though they probably won't do it. About shutting down Game Pass, which they probably won't do, at least not anytime really soon. About doing everything. They discuss everything. And so I guess why I kind of roll my eyes and get frustrated with so many of these rumors is, in theory, you could just make rumors up at this point because they're probably true in some capacity. And a big issue we're having, and I've talked about this, I just talked about it a few minutes ago, was that you can make up a rumor or push a rumor that is in this situation where they are considering everything technically. And it just doesn't happen because, of course, it didn't. Because most of these discussions don't go anywhere; they're just speculative, right? But the people who report it and get people all riled up and get people going on it, there's no consequences for being wrong or misleading, right? So I think it's really cool that Game Pass is getting Call of Duty day one. I think that if they want to make a true impact, we're almost certainly going to see them raise the price of Game Pass with this. My guess is they're going to have Ultimate go up to $19.99. They're going to introduce this family Game Pass thing, probably in the same window, to make it cheaper for people if they can organize that. And then I suspect they're going to make the lower tier. I think they'd be really smart to have a maximum of 2 tiers of Game Pass to get rid of the core, and just push that in with the second tier and have like a $9.99 and a $19.99 tier, where $19.99 gets you everything day one, gets you PC and console and streaming, maybe gets you some bonus content in Call of Duty, especially. Maybe you get Game Passes for free. Maybe you get credits every week or every month towards buying stuff. I don't know. And then that $9.99 maybe doesn't get day one first parties, but maybe still gets. Call of Duty is so special that I could see them do a thing where they say, hey, $9.99 tier will get first parties 6 months later. Not day one. That's for your next tier. But you'll still get all the other games that are on Game Pass, which is literally hundreds at this point. But you will get Call of Duty day one. Like, if their goal is to try to pull people to Xbox to buy Xbox consoles and or get people on Game Pass, that would be smart. If that's not their goal, I don't know why it wouldn't be, but then maybe you keep it, Call of Duty just on the higher tier. I just think that more than 2 tiers is a lot. I guess you could do like a $14.99 tier that has all the first parties day one, but is only console or only PC, where you get one or the other. For me, because I'm a freak, Ultimate's great for me because like I will go back and forth between playing the same games on PC or console. There's content reasons I would do that. There's also just quality of life reasons I would do that. But I don't know. I think it's all very interesting. I think Call of Duty on Game Pass is a big deal. And I'm really curious to see how all this stuff is going to play out in the long run. A kind of interesting development was that Activision announced that they're opening a new studio. It's called Elsewhere Entertainment, and they said it's going to be working on a new AAA first-person shooter franchise. My biggest thing with this being under Activision was just really hoping this isn't just going to be another Call of Duty studio, which at least it seems like it won't be. So we'll have to wait and see what that means. I think one of the interesting things about this announcement was a lot of hot takes from games industry people saying like, oh, this is a bad look after closing down, 4 studios, which they didn't close down 4, they closed down 3. It doesn't make it better, but it is more accurate. Because they took one in, one got dissolved, and all those people are being put with ZeniMax. I just, what's frustrating is it doesn't bother me at all to see just gamers who are kind of extra connected see that and get mad about it, because that's fair. They don't consider or care about the deeper or the how things actually work, right? What really bothers me is people in the industry reacting with the, oh, this is a bad look, because they know, and they should know, that that's not how these things work. That they didn't decide to shut down Tango and Hi-Fi the day they did it, and they didn't spin this studio up the day that they announced it, and that people still don't realize that it seems like, in large part, Activision Blizzard King and ZeniMax Bethesda still operate kind of independently, especially of each other, but even of Xbox to a point. Now that seems like that command structure is changing, but Activision just got acquired months ago. They didn't decide to open up the studio since they've been acquired. Almost certainly this has been in the works for many more months than that, or even years, maybe before the acquisition even started. And so it's, this reaction, like, I get the visceral reaction, but it's, in my opinion, kind of going back to that sensationalism, clickbait kind of rage reporting that we see, where you see, these journalists who have influence and who people trust, at least some people do. Now, it's especially people with an agenda, right? Even if they have one themselves. But, seeing people spin this is like, this is a bad look. How could they be opening studios and they're closing? That happens all the time. We're going to talk about it with PlayStation as well. It sucks. Like I said before, I'm never justifying or trying to make people be okay with these crappy business practices. But I do think it's important to talk about, the fact that they just kind of are what they are. And I hope they get better. That's not going to happen without legislation and unions. And those things are both going to be slow if they ever happen. But I think the optimist outlook on this is, yeah, it sucks that they shut down studios, but at least they're opening studios too. Like, at least they are creating jobs at the same time that they're unfortunately cutting them. I guess I'll get to this in a minute. There are rumors that we could see an announcement at the Xbox showcase of a new Doom game. If people may remember that during the ABK leaks, when I believe they showed the Bethesda ZeniMax kind of expected release schedule for games. Now, I believe this said that Starfield was going to come out in 2021. Obviously, that didn't happen. But there was, I think, at least one Doom game listed on there that people think that may be what is coming. It could be as soon as this year or maybe next year, and that will probably be announced soon. Xbox showed off this new Proteus controller for disabled people. That's like this insanely customizable controller thing. They also, in the last couple of years, have their own like Xbox. I believe this Proteus is being made by like a partner company. But Xbox has its own accessibility controller that has a bunch of inputs from devices that people who are physically disabled already use, like to communicate and things like that. This is really cool. PlayStation has this as well. This thing's interesting because it's kind of like a different take on this accessibility controller. One thing I saw people freaking out about was the cost. It's $300. People may not realize that accessibility devices are fairly low run. That they don't make a lot of them because there's a lot of people who are disabled, but comparatively, it's a fairly small number, which makes devices more expensive. And there's a really good chance that if they can prove this is really an accessibility thing, a lot of these folks can probably get at least some of the cost of this covered, very likely by insurance. So don't worry about the price. That's just the way it is, unfortunately, in that world, which I know a little bit about because of my day job. The final thing is some updates from the studios that were shut down, and kind of, yay, but sad news. Tango is going to put out one more patch for Hi-Fi Rush. They actually already did it to take care of some kind of lingering issues on all platforms, and kind of as a goodbye to everyone. That's been kind of tough to see. And then Arcane Austin, which initially it was announced that they were working on a patch that was going to make Redfall on offline playable, and that people were freaking out that wasn't going to happen anymore. That's actually not true. So a update including the offline mode, as well as a bunch of other kind of balancing and kind of quality of life fixes, is still going to come out, I believe, later this month or next month. I can't remember what timeline they had. before the studio fully shuts down. And that's really good. So for the people who definitely didn't give a crap about Redfall at all, and never talk about game preservation and other aspects, but were really concerned about this Redfall being offline playable. Well, it's happening. And I think that's really cool for them to get at least some amount of putting a bow on this game they put out, no matter the reception, no matter how people feel about it, kind of in the long run. I guess maybe it's nice for them to do that. A lot of the thinking and kind of research I've been doing, and just a lot of the conversation I've been seeing about these studio shutdowns. Again, let me make the disclaimer that I am not justifying or trying to, make anyone feel better about these, especially not the devs. No matter what I think or what the facts were or what the situation was, people losing their job always sucks. But there's been at least a little more nuanced conversation kind of happening on like the second tier of games media that I've noticed. And it paints a picture where Tango and Arcane Austin were two studios that, and I think I talked about this a little bit last week, neither one of them in the last 10 years have made anything that was, for lack of a better term, profitable. And it didn't look like either one of them had any prospects in the next 5 to 10 years that were going to do that either. And so, maybe the alternative is for Xbox or Microsoft or ZeniMax, Bethesda to step in and change things. That could have been an option other than shutting them down. But that kind of doesn't seem like it was in the cards. And unfortunately, I don't think shutting these studios down is as insane or as unreasonable as a lot of people were kind of portraying when it happened. There's so many comments I saw, and I expect it from gamers, but I expect more from journalists and stuff. There were just so many comments of like, there is no reason to do this. And it's what I kind of said, I think it was more in my video I made last week about these shutdowns, is that like, yeah, there are reasons. There's business reasons. And you may not like them, and you don't have to, and that's totally fine. It's super okay to be mad about this. But especially if you dig into those two studios' recent and even longer history and the things that they were working on and theoretically in the future, it just isn't that crazy to shut them down. But it still sucks, right? Like, I guess that's where I land at this point is I don't want to see this happen. I think it's up to Xbox and Microsoft and ABK and Bethesda ZeniMax to not let their studios go down a path where it does make sense to shut them down. But I also think that there needs to be a lot more nuance in the conversation about when these things happen, because when you look at the nitty gritty, when you look at the details, these things do make a little more sense than maybe people want to acknowledge, but I don't know. Moving on to PlayStation news, they released some sales numbers for recent quarterly and all that stuff. So in the 2023 Q4, which I believe was January through March, they sold 4.5 million PlayStation 5 units. In the fiscal year of 2023, which should have been from April to March, April 2023 to March of 24, 20.8 million units sold. And then lifetime for PlayStation 5, they're at 59.3 million units sold. There is a slight asterisk here that they count Portal units as PlayStations. That has to be such a small number. I can't imagine it really influences this number at all. I believe this also is the PSVR 2, but that has famously not sold very well. And so I think it's good to note that those devices, I believe, count as individual. Like for whatever reason, Sony counts them as PlayStation units. I mean, it's not that crazy. They're obsessed with console units sold numbers. That's why they would do this. Luckily, or however you would see it, it doesn't skew the numbers that much because those units haven't sold very much. There is a prediction of the fiscal year 24, so that'd be April of this year through March of 2025, that they expect to sell 18 million units. So that's a projected lower PlayStation 5 sold in the next year, which isn't that crazy. It's going into its fifth year of life, likely heading towards a new gen of consoles. And then it also included in this report that Helldivers 2 has sold 12 million copies. I think that's a super interesting stat because I would love to know how many of those copies were sold on PC. I would bet on the high side, maybe 10 million. On the low side, maybe 7 to 8. I just remember that I think it was the MPD reports or whatever, some of the sales tracking things was suggesting that Helldivers 2 didn't sell very well on PlayStation 5, or at least, for how many units it has sold, it didn't sell very well there. But that it's been kind of carried and just extremely popular on PC. And that, I bought it. I'm one of these people. And I think that's pretty interesting. And I think that when we have seen some of the conversation around the way that PlayStation is going to behave in the future with where they put their games and how soon they come to PC and things like that, I think Helldivers 2 is going to be a big factor in that and how well it has sold. PlayStation definitely needs to get a little more consumer friendly when it comes to the way that they put games on PC because of the issues that we've had with Helldivers 2 and now Ghost of Tsushima. But at the very least, this should be pushing them that way. And the next story, being the new leadership that was announced, is probably going to be a big part of that. So they have announced a new co-CEO situation after Jim Ryan left. So they have Hideki Nishino, and I apologize if I didn't pronounce that properly. They are the CEO of the Platform Business Group for Sony, specifically Sony Entertainment. Then Herman Holst, who is already in a leadership position, is the CEO of the Sony Entertainment Studio Business Group. So it's the difference between platform and studio with these. So the assumption is that Hideki is going to be mostly focused on hardware and things like that. And then we'll have Herman Holst focused on the studio and the software side of things. Ironically, this is a similar situation to what Xbox has, where Sarah Bond is in charge of more the hardware side of things. And I believe it was Matt Booty, I believe, is the one that's more in charge of the software and the studio side of things, with Phil Spencer being kind of the connection between them. I'm really curious to how this plays out. I believe this Hideki fella was the interim CEO, who was the one that was really big on talking about releasing games on multiple platforms and specifically PC, and doing more day and date stuff, getting away from the obsession with hardware unit sales that they've had for a long time, and being a little more open to putting their games on PC faster, if not day and day. I see a lot of PlayStation fans really, really still stuck in the idea that PlayStation will never do day and day with their first party games, and they may not for a while, but I don't think people realize that. I think for fans and for Jim Ryan, that console sales number is so important. It's the most important thing. And it is good for PlayStation because you sell consoles, and when you sell games on those consoles, mostly digitally, you lose no money in your profit margin. You make all the money. When you sell on PC, at least in PlayStation's current situation, you have to give a cut to Steam, right? And they obviously don't want that. That's why Xbox even has its own launcher, even though they also put their games on Steam. But if people if you buy your Xbox games through their launcher on PC, they get all of that. They don't have to share with Steam, right? Now their launcher isn't great, so most people probably still go to Steam, but you use their launcher for Game Pass, which is probably what most people use it for. I think we 100% see a PlayStation launcher on PC soon, probably really soon. I don't know if it's going to be any good. It probably won't be. Their PC side of things typically isn't great, but they'll get better. And they're going to do that, especially if the goal is to ever do day and day, because that will be a way for them to get the full money from the sales, not have to share it with Steam. And I'll be curious if they keep putting their games on Steam or not once they have their own launcher. I bet they don't. I don't think they will. So I would be very surprised if that's not something coming up probably extremely soon. So be on the lookout for that. There was another story here about how the Deviation Games, which recently shut down, and they were like, for some time, they were acquired by Sony. I believe before they shut down, they technically had broken off their relationship. But now apparently a bunch of the founders and a bunch of the people at that studio are starting a new studio within Sony. This is like real weird vibes to me. One, because this is the story I was talking about where people are giving Xbox and Microsoft crap for cutting studios and starting a new one. I mean, that's what's happening here as well. And what's really interesting to me, my crazy conspiracy speculation wonders if something about Deviation Games just wasn't working as a studio. They were starting to make it, I believe they were supposed to be making a first person exclusive game for PlayStation. This was probably in somewhat response to the ABK acquisition and Sony being scared that they were going to get cut off from Call of Duty because Deviation is a bunch of ex Call of Duty devs. My guess is that something just wasn't working with Deviation, and instead of fixing it or whatever they were doing, it seems like they just kind of headhunted all of the people they wanted from Deviation to make a new studio, and everyone else is out of luck. I'm sure it's probably a really weird day for anyone who worked at Deviation and isn't part of this new project, because I don't know, it kind of seems like they just cherry picked that studio, shut it down, and took all the people they wanted to make a studio. I mean, it's the way it goes. It can be a dirty business at times, but I am curious to see how quickly something comes up with that. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced that as soon as I think they have a showcase happening this month. That could be either a state of play or just a showcase, which tend to be pretty different shows from PlayStation. So keep an eye on that. And then last for PlayStation, we had a Ghost of Tsushima release on Steam, I believe yesterday. It hit a peak player count of 60,000. Not hitting, Helldivers 2 numbers. Obviously, it's a very different game. But it's still good. That's a healthy number. That means they've sold probably a pretty good chunk of games there. This game is embroiled in the whole issue that happened with Helldivers, where initially they were going to require Steam players have a PSN account. They eventually got rid of that and did the whole like, hey, we're sorry, we're still learning thing. But what they didn't take back was when they implemented that idea, they also cut the game off from 177 countries, now it's 180, who couldn't get PSN accounts. But then, and this is for Helldivers 2 and Tsushima, after they got rid of that requirement, they never reopened sales or the ability to they never relisted those games in those countries, and no one really understands why, especially with Ghost of Tsushima, which is primarily a single player experience. It technically has a multiplayer mode, but that's not why you buy Ghost of Tsushima. It's just like an add-on, right? So Sony's still just doing some weird stuff when it comes to PC, and the PS5 faithful doesn't care about this. If anything, they've doubled down and supported Sony with this. For some reason, I don't really know like what the argument is, but I don't really care. It's fine. Just blind devotion, which is, I probably have it too for my own favorites. But what's really strange about it, and I don't think there's very much conversation about it, is I think that this has like significantly hurt Sony's reputation with PC players. So when, and you have a lot of notable people in the PC side of things really making this a big point, right? Like notable people like Pirate Software and stuff like that. So when that PlayStation launcher comes out, when they start putting games on PC faster or day and day even, I'm really curious to if this is going to have any lasting effect. Like I said before, most gamers have the memories of Goldfish, so it probably won't, especially if they put out good games, which has been a savior for PlayStation for multiple generations now of, you can be kind of crappy to your consumers. You can make a bunch of really bad decisions and have UI and software that's kind of not great and weird systems that you force your users into. But they won't care if you put out super good games, and that's what they've done. And I think that will probably continue at least to a point with PC. So interesting stuff there. I didn't have anything for Nintendo this week. I suspect that's going to be more of a beginning of next year topic. For some other topics that I wanted to talk about before we wrap this show up is the Division Heartland has been canceled by Ubisoft. This was the Red Storm kind of spin-off game from the Division franchise. It unfortunately is being shut down. It's been in the works for a long time. People have even been playing like beta and alpha versions of it for a few years. And unfortunately, they're shutting it down. And they announced that they're shutting it down to have those resources work on more profitable or more whatever ventures like X Defiant and Rainbow Six Siege, which is like I get it. I know they're technically right. Siege has been one of Ubisoft's longest lasting and most consistent ventures. I can't imagine that game is still like where it was even 3 or 4 years ago, but maybe it is. I don't pay any attention to it or that community. X Defiant is a game I've played multiple times the last couple years in various tests, both public and private at first. And it's a game that has always felt completely soulless and awful to me. I think X Defiant is one of the worst feeling games I've ever played, especially as someone who plays a lot of Call of Duties and kind of the type of game it's going for. But it's got its evangelical people that seem to think it's the next best thing. Ironically, most of the people who push X Defiant hard do it because it's not supposed to have skill-based matchmaking, which is real prevalent in Call of Duty, and it's the idea that skill-based matchmaking will match you in multiplayer primarily with people who have played a similar number of hours as you and has similar metrics as you. And the idea is to keep brand new players from getting matched up with people who have played for 1,000 hours and they're just going to get curb stomped, right? So a lot of players don't like that. They say because it's not like fair or whatever. I think it's because they don't like getting to level 20, 30 and realizing that after they've stomped all the noobs who have never played the game before, when they have to play people who are also really good, they don't like losing. And that's at least my opinion, but I could be wrong. So X Defiant, a big push from them was that they weren't going to do that. And now they announced this week, only a few days before the game inexplicably comes out. I guess it comes out in a few days after a long delay that was supposed to come out in 2023. They've now said, like, oh, yeah, we're going to have skill-based matchmaking in some of our modes, which is just funny to me because that was, from what I could tell, the main selling point for a lot of people on the game. So I'm curious to how that works out. But I despise that. I hate the idea that Heartland's getting shut down to help, especially X Defiant, because that game's servers will get shut down in a year. I don't mean that as an insult to the people developing it, to the people supporting it. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's the biggest game that Ubisoft's ever had. Not really, but I don't wish ill will. It's just, it still just has that formula of this Ubisoft game. It's going to come out. They're going to pay a bunch of streamers to play it for a couple days, and then it's going to become irrelevant. They'll keep supporting it because Ubisoft is actually pretty good about supporting games for longer than you think, even when they're not very successful. But it's a bummer. There has been some indication, and at least my predictions would be that Red Storm, the developer of the Division Heartland, will eventually work on the Division 3. The problem with that is that game is not in production. It is maybe in pre-production with a small team, but I don't expect Division 3 to go into full production until maybe mid or late 2025. And so until then, I suspect Red Storm is going to help with those other projects. And for my own personal, if you've been around for long enough, you'll know I've kind of talked about how I've been involved with Heartland. I still can't talk about the full details of it, but what I'm willing to say, because if I get in trouble for this, it's stupid, especially now. The Division franchise has always had this thing called the Elite Task Force. And over the years with Division 1 and 2, these were groups of players that they would sometimes like fly to Malmo, Sweden, to come do like in-person workshops, or I think they did it in North Carolina at Red Storm once or maybe more times. It's essentially a like fan, it's a way to take players and have them interact directly with devs to kind of work on the future of the franchise and the games, right? So they did this with Heartland, and myself and a handful of other people have been part of this since late 2020 or maybe early 2021. I couldn't really pin down exactly when this started, but they pitched us the game, they pitched us the history of it, you know, how they got to where they were and what their plan was. And then for the last 2, 3, 4 years, we've been playing builds of it and checking it out and seeing all the changes they did. And this was before, so you're going to see people talking about how they played like an alpha or a beta of the game, because they've had a pretty good number of those. I'm talking about like a couple years before that I've been involved. I can't say much about the details of it. One of the developers did probably break their own NDA and talk about how Heartland originally was going to be Division 2 survival, or at least that's my interpretation. It was going to be a Division 2 mode that then escalated into a spin-off game. I really wish it would have just been that mode. I really wish Red Storm would have never left the Division 2. It would have been really cool if they could have just made a Survival 2.0 and then continued working on the Dark Zone and the conflict mode. I think the Division 2 would have been way better off, and we wouldn't have had them spend 4 years developing a spinoff that's now going to get shuttered. And I don't think any element of it will ever see the light of day, unfortunately. It's just a bummer. It sucks. I feel really bad for the Red Storm devs. As for what Heartland was, I can't reveal exact details yet. I'm kind of waiting for permission to talk more about it. What I will say, again, I don't think this should get me in any trouble, is everything that Heartland was over its course of development. I think it was a neat idea. And what I will say is, people have been talking about what they played in those tests. What the game was turning into was something completely different than that. I unfortunately don't believe that at any point what they were trying to do with Heartland was ever going to hit. I just, not because it wasn't good, it was just too late. That's why I still think in hindsight, just doing that Division 2 mode on a smaller scale that could have come out in 2020, 2021 would have been way better for the franchise and everyone involved. Because if Heartland had come out in any of its iterations in 2024, 2025, I think you would have seen a lot of people just be like, oh, this feels like it would have been really cool 4 years ago. And that's kind of my impression as well. So as I find out, I'm allowed to talk more about it in the future. I'll do videos and maybe talk about it. But that's kind of what I feel like I can say right now. So there it is. We had a report from 2K, and so the headline was that they announced that GTA6 will be coming out in the autumn of 2025, so probably late summer, early, maybe fall-ish times. They also announced that they lost, in the last quarter, $2.9 billion. I've seen some breakdowns on this. I don't fully understand how they managed to lose that much money. It seems like from the business, kind of the articles and stuff I saw about it, the people who actually understand the breakdown of this, that it doesn't seem like it's that as damning as it appears to a person like me who can't even comprehend what that much money even means. Like that number means nothing to my brain. Like, you know, millions I can kind of comprehend, like after buying a house and savings accounts, and like I can like comprehend $1 million. I can't even begin to comprehend $3 billion. That's a fake number in my head, but apparently it's not, because a company can lose it and still exist. So there was also like a weird kind of situation where it was announced, I believe a month or two ago, that there was a couple studios under 2K that had been shuttered and their projects ended. But when asked about this, or when commenting on it, Strauss Zelnick, who's the head of 2K, basically denied the studios had been shut down, even though when I looked back at some of the information about the shutdowns, there was like emails that people shared from like 2K saying, like, you know, talking about they're like being laid off and all that. Super weird in my opinion, but I hope it's just a CEO being wrong and that they're not just blatantly lying about shutting down studios. I'm sure if he can get skewered by people in the media, he will. So, and it seems like that's already happening. So I suspect we'll see them clear that up here sooner or later. But no matter how much money they lost here, and you know, in a year when they start selling GTA 6, I suspect they'll make it back. The last thing they did say is that they're supposed to reasonably soon. I believe I believe it's next month. Be announcing a sequel to one of their legendary franchises, or however they worded it. Most people seem to be expecting that to be an official announcement of the next BioShock game. So we'll have to wait and see what comes from that. Square Enix is going to focus more on multi-platform in their own kind of call and report on their finances. They reported that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy 16, and Foam Stars all fell short of sales expectations. They didn't give any numbers. There's two sides to this coin. It's the idea that them only being on PlayStation with those games, despite its really high unit sales, may have not translated to that many sales in general. Even though those games reviewed really well. I don't know about Foam Stars, but the Final Fantasy games reviewed extremely well, actually. But also Square Enix is known for downplaying sales a lot. So, even when games did pretty well for what they were, games like Guardians of the Galaxy back when they still owned that studio, they really downplayed it and like really crapped on it. Even though it sold pretty well, considering what it was. And so, these numbers, it's kind of hard to, without them giving numbers, it's hard to interpret what they really mean here or how well those games really did. They are reorganizing in a pretty big way into 5 console teams for making games and 1 mobile team. And this comes along with the basically what seemed like to be a promise from them that they're probably not going to do platform exclusives anymore. And that includes with games like Final Fantasy and other games that they've traditionally done only with PlayStation. So that's pretty interesting. They showed an interest in not only putting games on Xbox, obviously, but also Nintendo hardware and doing stuff on PC much faster, because pretty famously, just like every other Sony exclusive game, or most of them, these games don't come to PC until long after they have come out on PlayStation, I assume by financial agreement, and we'll probably be seeing that go away. I will be really curious. It will be a wild day to see Final Fantasy 17 be on Xbox day one. If Xbox is still around, I think it will be. But I guess it's at least worth adding my own clickbait to that conversation. Then the final story here I have before I wrap things up is Summer Game Fest partners were announced. Xbox and PlayStation were on the list, which is kind of curious because PlayStation is expected to have whatever kind of show they're going to have a week or two before Summer Game Fest, and then Xbox is having theirs 2 days after. So I suspect with Xbox, it'll just be maybe teasers for things they're going to show, maybe like one big announcement they'll do there for Jeff. They've been very kind to him, like they announced the series consoles on the Game Awards, not even on their own stuff. PlayStation, I'm betting it's going to be more like additional things, so they're going to have their own show, and then they'll probably save something for Summer Game Fest, and as well as kind of reiterating things that they show off in their own show. We also saw that EA will be there, which isn't that surprising. They just revealed the first trailer for their NCAA football game today. There's also been extremely, very seemingly reliable rumors that Dragon Age Dreadwolf is going to get its full reveal during Summer Game Fest, as well as a release date. And so that's a pretty obvious one for them. For the folks who pay attention to my content, who are Mass Effect fans and so on, there's no Hasbro or Archetype here. So I think a lot of people thought that maybe Exodus would get a little bit more attention. I believe it was revealed back in the Game Awards in December. That game is so weird because it seems like it could come out like within a year, or it might be like 5 years away. Like the way that they're talking about it is, it seems like it's coming out really soon, but we just don't know. It's the first game from a new studio that's fairly small and has a co-dev that's helping them. So I don't know. But it is kind of strange, or it's at least interesting that they aren't showing up to Summer Game Fest, or unless they're gonna show up at PlayStation or Xbox or maybe another showcase. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And then there's like 55 total partners, and it says round 1, so it seems likely that Jeff is leaving open the possibility that more studios or platforms or publishers may show up. The one thing to remember with Jeff Keighley, and when he says like, oh, all these people are partners with Summer Game Fest, 2/3 of them are probably just advertisers. Like you're just going to see an ad during the show, and there won't be any, you know, I understand that trailers are ads, but ads are ads, right? So trailers are, you know, in my opinion, are typically like an announcement of something new and something exciting and cool. An ad is for a game that no one really cares about, but they want people to see, and maybe they can capture some people. That's at least the difference in my head. And I suspect many of these things are going to be that. I want to be excited about Summer Game Fest. I just think the Game Awards has been okay. It's been pretty good over the years. Summer Game Fest, I think, has been awful every year. This will be the fourth one, I think, and they've just been bad every year, in my opinion. I don't think they've been very good. Last year, I think the Summer Game Fest may have been the worst show of the top 4 I can think of. I thought Xbox had the best one, even objectively, even without my own bias. I thought Ubisoft actually had the second best show, even if I thought they had the best showing. And then PlayStation and Summer Games Fest. I mean, again, this isn't purely a bias thing. You have to remember that for PlayStation, they basically just announced a bunch of live service games. Nothing from their big headline studios everyone's excited for. And I think a few of those projects, including Naughty Dog's Last of Us multiplayer live service thing, have been canceled. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'm really curious to how it kind of plays out this year. It will probably be different. PlayStation has to have something. I have no idea. Like they have to tell people what's coming from Naughty Dog, from Sony Santa Monica, from, you know, Insomniac. We know it's probably Wolverine's their next one, but how far away are those? You know, they're in, you know, the Final Fantasy games, and others have kind of picked up their exclusives, but their first party studios have been pretty silent. We don't really know what's going on. But surely they have good stuff coming. So I bet we find out about that really, really soon. And that's where I'm gonna wrap the show up. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please consider supporting all of my content by watching, listening, sharing, following my socials, or throwing a few bucks my way through one of the ways that you can do it. To find all of that stuff, check out the link in the description of the show. It will take you to everything that I do and all the ways to support if you want to. And that's all I have for this episode of the Baunfire podcast. So until next time.